Pessoal, bom dia. Hoje eu estou aqui, né, com uma presença aqui de um professor que eu tinha muita vontade de convidá-lo, né, de chamá-lo aqui para o canal, porque é um tema que a gente ainda não trabalhou e que é um tema assim muito bacana, muito gostoso da gente estudar, bem interessante. Eu estou aqui com o Tom Kuusela, que ele é pesquisador, também PhD e também é arquivista na Universidade de Uppsala. E ele tem justamente pesquisas voltadas no âmbito do folclore escandinavo. E então a gente vai conversar sobre vários aspectos desse assunto, que é um assunto que eu acho que é muitíssimo interessante de ser abordado, até porque também tem algumas relações também com a questão da mitologia nórdica, mas é um assunto assim também que tem as suas peculiaridades. Então eu vou aqui passar agora a palavra para o Sr. Tommy. Mr. Tommy, thank you so much for being here in the channel. For me, it's a big pleasure receiving you. I was very excited about to discuss about the Nordic folklore, Scandinavian folklore, and for me, it's a big honor receiving you here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Before we start now, how did you start your interest for research about this topic related to the Scandinavian folklore, to about these tales? How this is for you is a start in your career?
Oh, that's a long story actually. Uh, I think I need to go back to my childhood when I discovered J.R.R. Tolkien, started playing role-playing games, things like that, and that made me interested in mythologies, folklore, all kinds of things. And I've always been interested in, history, things like that. And when I started at university, one of my main subject was actually history of religion. So that's where I got my PhD. And I focused on, Old Norse mythology, also studied a lot of folklore traditions. And I ended up, combining my interests in my dissertation. And at the same time, I've been, writing about supernatural beliefs in Scandinavia, and been all around presenting talks about folklore, written about it in both Swedish and English. There's even translations of some of my works to, I know this one in Spanish, and I think this in French as well. I'm not, yeah. So yeah, it's been a long road. It's a bumpy road, but I've always followed my heart and my biggest interest, which is supernatural stuff, which is kind of normal for someone who studies religion, history of religion.
Oh, that's very interesting. I think that the folklore is a part of many aspects of childhood of persons in many parts of the world, and this is very very interesting to know that Scandinavian folklore have many aspects with this world of the childhoods, and this is very very interesting. And one of the most peculiar things in the Scandinavian folklore is the aspects that surrounding this area. How we can define in some word or some specific explanations about what is the Scandinavian folklore for persons that love? How we can define that, have some characteristics that define this is a Scandinavian folklore?
Oh, that's a quite large question, actually. I think it's folklore has been defined as like our cultural DNA in a way. It's a way of life, thinking, worldviews, notions, all kinds of things coming together, and how we perceive the surroundings and nature and things like that. So in one way, folklore is similar around the globe, everywhere, but in every country you have differences. Even like a country like Sweden, which is quite big in European standards. So you have major differences, like from the northern part of Sweden compared to the southern part. and also east-west. So they have different, some supernatural beings are similar, but they have different names, and they might behave in different ways depending on where in the country people are speaking about them. So I don't know if you should say something that's typical Scandinavian or Swedish. I might say Scandinavian because this is a Scandinavian thing. Is the belief in trolls? Because this is one word from our folklore in Scandinavia, which has like been exported, and everyone all around the world knows this word, which is actually an Old Norse word from the beginning. But troll is a certain kind of supernatural being, not the thing that we think about today, someone that disrupts discussions on the internet or something like an internet troll. But before that, we had like this supernatural being which looked like human beings, but they could, threaten normal state of being. They could disrupt things, but they could also be like good neighbors or bad neighbors if you want to. So trolls are probably what many people think about when they think about Swedish or Scandinavian folklore.
That's interesting. So trolls are one of the most figure that mark this point of Scandinavian folklore in some terms. It's a creature that's a very definition from this is type of folklore. Oh, that's very interesting. And one of the most important connection that you see for the North mythology and the Scandinavian folklore, we can say that many figures of the Scandinavian folklore are searching for this Nordic, this process of the Norse mythology, certainly in the Viking Age, or some figures of this folklore appear only in another time in 8th century, 9th century. How do you can say about that?
That's actually a quite common question, because many people want to trace the belief in supernatural beings as far back in time as possible. And in Scandinavia, usually go back to like the Viking Age. And for the Viking Age, we have some, written sources. Most of them are from Iceland, the Icelandic sagas, and you also have the like Eddic poetry and things like that. And some of the supernatural beings, like trolls, giants, or jötnar, you can find them in the Old Norse sources. You also can find belief in alfar or vettir, people like supernatural collective of beings that are living underground. So these are beings that you can also find in later folklore. With later folklore, I mean 19th century, the 1800s. So which is a time we have lots and lots of information about, because there were many people who created folklore archives. Many people were out interviewing old people, asking them about beliefs and supernatural things and folk life in general. So we have millions of handwritten pages from the 1800s in different archives in Scandinavia, in Denmark, in Norway, and Sweden, and also like Finland also has some of the oldest folklore archives. But there are but at the same time, some of the most popular, famous supernatural folklore beings in Sweden, for example, the female forest spirit, which we call skogsrå, which means forest ruler. She's not known further back than the 1600s, when people were actually accused of having sexual intercourse with this being, and this was a sentence that you could be sentenced to death for having this, because this was perceived by the clergy as a contract with the devil, because the church saw all of the supernatural beings as agents of Satan or the devil. And another like popular supernatural being, which is a farmstead spirit or house spirit called Tomte Nisse, usually living at old farms, helping out with work and things like that. It's actually the most popular one today. But we don't know anything about the tomte further back than Saint Bridget, and then it goes back to 1300s in her revelations. The only canonized saint from Sweden is Saint Bridget, and she wrote about tomte in the 1300s.
Oh, that's interesting. So, um, have some connections with this Norse mythology, but at the same time, we saw that some figures have many participation in another times in different epochs of from Scandinavian history. That's
Yeah, and like some other ones, like Fossegrimmen in Norway, or we call it the Necken. Also popular one, a fiddler playing and trying to lure people into dangerous waters and drowning them. He's known at least since the 1500s, but the word itself, even though many Swedes today, because in Swedish, neck could also be to be naked. So people tend to think of the neck as something to be naked, but the word has actually nothing to do with that. It's an old Germanic word having to do with water. And the oldest, to my knowledge, description of supernatural, dangerous monsters lurking in water connected with this word is from Beowulf. The story of Beowulf, as probably people who are looking at this channel knows about, is after Beowulf has slain Grendel, he goes to Grendel's mother's lair, and then he has to swim down in water because it's a cave underneath. And it says in Old English that there are some of the monsters called Neckas. So that comes from the same word, actually. So you can, in a way, trace back the neck to this old English poem.
that's a very interesting information because it's a very common people think that some words are very closer to expression in English and think that the creature like Nuck and we say are very related to the word naked that you say, and that's not the significance of this word, and that's very curious to know that.
And yeah, and you also had like, you know, artists. Artists they like to paint and depict different supernatural beings, especially in the national romantic sense in the late 1800s. And what they did was to remove the clothes from Nicken. So if people are looking like an old paintings and things like that of Nicken, they will see a naked man, and that make them even more like, oh, because it's a naked man on the paintings and the word sounds like being naked, they think of the neck as something that's naked, but it has nothing to do with it. And in all the folklore, the neck is usually dressed. He tried to seduce women, and he's properly dressed and things like that. The same thing with the forest spirit, because artists like to portray a naked young woman luring men into the woods. But in the old folklore descriptions, she usually shows herself, in many cases at least, with a beautiful dress or something that is also out of order. Because if you're in the deep forest in Sweden, which is dangerous, it used to be really, really dangerous. If you see like a beautiful woman in a dress in the forest, that's very uncanny. It's not of this world, so that's part of being supernatural there.
Oh, that's very interesting. And one of the things that was very interesting about the Scandinavian folklore is the types of creatures we saw, that aspects that you say with some mix of animals, that with human forms, and with some troll forms, or many forms, that aspects that was from this type of folklore. And what you can say about the duality of these figures? We can say that many are evil figures, are good figures, or have these two aspects in this some types of Scandinavians folk tales about these figures.
Well, there's so many different types of supernatural beings in folklore, but I think that's also the case all around the world. We are fortunate in Sweden because we have so many of them collected, so many stories collected. I think in every country in the world you find the same amount of beings, but in many countries they never collect that, and like the main religion tried to suppress this kind of thinking. But there is, are they evil or are they good? That's a good question. Uh, I think that depends on who. If you go travel back in time, I think most people would say that the majority of these supernatural beings are, if not evil, very close to evil. They want to disrupt human lives, or they want to be left alone. So you, some of them are like nature spirits. So you should not disturb them, or you should show respect while out in nature or something like that. So they are not. I think the duality of good and evil doesn't really work for them. But if you ask like the church, they would say that everything is evil. Everything comes from the devil. It's his way of trying to seduce, lure people into bad things. But some of the like supernatural beings, I mentioned Tomte before, the farmstead spirit or Nisse, and that was actually one of the most popular supernatural beings because this it was always a he, and like showed himself like an old man. He most of the time invisible, of course, but when some people saw the Tomte, always working by himself, a solitary being, uh, looked like an old farmer, but not height was like a small child, sometimes with a beard, sometimes without a beard. And he helped out with the work at the farm, and he in that way he helped with the farm luck, so to speak. He helped with the farm prosper. So he's kind of one of the beings that helped out making everything work at the farm in a way, and people wanted to keep a tomte just because of that. While some people were afraid of their like souls, if they were most people in I mean in 1800 everyone was Christian, so they were some people were afraid that they would do something bad because they had a tomte, and they asked a cleric or a priest to come there and try to get rid of the tomte. And some people are saying that they are experiencing bad harvest, and that the animals become sick and things like that when the tomte leaves. So yeah, I think it's a tricky question, but most people would say that the majority of the supernatural beings were some were typical evil, but some of them were more like neutral, a chaotic neutral, to speak in Dungeons and Dragons terms, if you know what I mean. Like they were not good, not evil. They were something in between.
That's great point that you say. So we have this depends of the circumstance from, I think, from the curator of the description. They will be good or no. It's depend, and that's interesting to solve that. And one of the things that I was questioning myself in many aspects that I research about the Scandinavian folklore is figures that are related to aspects of the nature or the flowers. We can say that some figures in the Scandinavian folklore try to protect the nature, or they are some aspect of a guardian of the forest, or we can say that no, it's the forest is just the ambient that they live in, of some these figures lives. Or how do you we can say about this aspect? We can say in some point that they are some protector of the secrets of the forest.
In one sense, maybe, but they are more like spirits, personification of nature. They are considered old, ancient, even. They've been there for forever almost, and so they. I mean, stories about supernatural beings are stories about human beings. So we give each other borders, rules, and things like that, and how to behave in different places, and by telling these legends or beliefs. So some stories about supernatural beings in nature can also be for a hunter. For example, if you're out in the forest, you need to behave in a certain way to respect nature, and in that way you can see the supernatural being, if you want to, as a protector of nature. And in the same time, you have like the forest spirit again. Her name suggests, and also the legends, that she is the ruler of the forest. The animals, the wild animals of the forest, are hers. So if like a hunter agrees to have sexual intercourse with her, they form like a relationship. She can point him to sleeping bears or elks or things like that, and help him out with his hunting luck. We always talk about luck as like a force. There's like a certain amount of luck, and for hunting luck, you have fishing luck and things like that. And if you get more of it, that means that someone else will get less of it. So it's a certain amount, and yeah, so that's why also magic comes in, or sorcery. You have to take luck from others and apply it to yourself. But that's also something that can be in one way controlled by some such supernatural beings.
Oh, that's very I think it's a very interesting thing, because we can say that many of these creatures are very connected to nature, but it depends of we analyze of the situation that these connections are being related to protection of the nature, but in some points that are more interesting to solve, that the point that they are part of this context of the nature, and this is a very interesting thing to analyze and understand.
And for some of them, like giants, for example, which is my PhD topic, one of my favorite supernatural beings. They were like something that people, at least in the 1800s or 1600s, 1700s, things like that, believed had left the country long ago. What they did was to form the country. So you can see like certain mountains looking in a certain way, because there was a belief that back in the days the mountains were softer, and you could see forms of the giants having lain they had sat at some mountains or laid in some fields, and you have lakes, and you have things that were created by giants in a way. The giants left when Christianity came to Scandinavia. That's the usual explanation in folk belief. But the giants lived on in folk tales, which is something else. So they were also forming nature in a way. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree too. And I think Scandinavian folklore have many figures that are related to water. To water, it's I think that an element of the nature that are present in many creatures from this type of folklore. And we can say that was part of the some inspirations from this tradition related to the navigation of many aspects of this, that these figures are appear, like we have in the heaven fruit, that's sightings. We have the knocking that you say, or we have the kraken. And how we can say about this type of figures that are related to the sea?
Oh, there are many of them. Scandinavia is surrounded by ocean. So especially if you're living close to the ocean, even if it's Baltic Seas or Atlantic Ocean, I mean, the ocean in itself is a dangerous place to travel on. especially back in the days. You don't know what's in the bottom of the ocean. So many things can happen when out in a boat. You see things, experience things, and people populate these notions, beliefs, experiences with the supernatural. So you have like a certain kind of merfolk, which is not as cute as the Little Mermaid usually. Uh, they are like a people similar to human beings living under the sea or the ocean. They have cattle and things like that and can show themselves. Some of them, especially female ones, if they appear by themselves, they're trying to lure people into the ocean to drown them, very much like the sirens in Greek mythology. And you also, as you mentioned, Kraken from Norway. It's also like this, uh, yeah, it's octopusy kind of thing, a big thing that could draw down, crush ships and things like that. There are, it's not as old as people tend to think, but the idea that there are huge monsters living in the ocean is old. You can find it in the old Norse sources, really, like the Midgard serpent and things like that. It's also a part of the same idea. And in the Olaus Magnus, which was a Catholic archbishop who left Sweden in the 1500s because the Swedish king wanted Sweden to become Protestant, so he went down to Rome and he wrote this wonderful book, a description of the northern people. But he also did a map of the Nordic countries called Carta Marina in 1537, and that you can check it out like on the internet or something, but it's everywhere. Carta Marina by Olaus Magnus. On it, there are so many monsters everywhere in the seas. From if you look like, especially from Iceland to Norway, they are everywhere. And I think people tended to they saw things at sea. Things happen that they didn't really understand. Or you could also, if you had bad luck, you can also see what you call it. What's the English word for this now? Like a ghost ship, the Flying Dutchman, I think it's called in English. So this is like a ship that never goes to harbor. It's just sailing around, luring away other ships filled with dead people. And in Norway, they also have this draugar, which is the same word as the Icelandic draugar, the dead seaman, actually, in a way. So yeah, you have all kinds of scary things out at sea. And I think it's also like Scandinavia used to be a sea nation, or that's why the Vikings are famous.
Oh, that's it's a good point that you told, because it's we can say that the monsters are very connected to the type of parts of the world, that the oceans are a thing that surround the world, and this is have some big connection with some creatures that are with this connection with the sea. And this is very, very interesting, because we saw that Scandinavia have a lot of these creatures of sea, and this is I think it's a very, how can I say, it's a very common. We saw that they have some preference for these types of creatures. We can say that, example, Hans Christian Andersen have some disconnection to create the his Lily Lily Heaven Through, and this is I think that was a connection that was very, very interesting, because it's one of the most creatures appears in this type uh, of ambient, much
Mm.
more common than the forest ambient. The forest ambient have a lot of creatures, but the sea have some special in the world. Many persons know much more about the creatures of the sea than the forest creatures, and this is a very interesting to solve this connection with the
But at
world and
the
the sea.
yeah, and at the same time, there's so much we don't know about the oceans. So they're the deepest part of the oceans and creatures living there. We still don't know anything about them. and there's popping up new like species now and then, and we know that there are these huge things swimming around in the oceans. Whales are something that people, of course, have seen from the beginning, especially in the Nordic countries. We also have this like giant octopuses and things that there are different things which are so different from what life on land is. So of course, when people see this and see parts of it or things like that, they are if, the supernatural stories just happens in those at those occasions.
Oh, that's nice to know that. And one of the things that we can describe about the Scandinavian folklore is the feminine figures are sometimes are described to seductive and have this appeal for some sexuality in some aspects of the Scandinavian folklore. We can say that many of these visions that are changed or they are created for aspects that say, oh, this you will commit a sin if you have relationship with this woman, have some influence that church have in this type of folklore. Or you can say, oh, every time these figures appear like that. What you can say about that presence of the feminine figures in this Scandinavian folklore, like schoolgirl or
Yeah, it's actually there's many of them, and Sweden in particular is quite different there because we have this skogsrå, the forest ruler, which is always female, very few forest men, so to speak. If you compare with other countries in Europe, it's usually a man, a male figure who's ruling the forest, like in Finland, the Tapio, or things like that. Uh, and her becoming sexualized has been explained by folklorists as like male erotic fantasies, because these are like people who encountered a forest spirit were male, usually. People didn't go out into the forests. It was like you needed you only did it if you have a certain kind of what do you say in English, if you needed to go into the forest, like if you were a hunter or if you were like a coal burner or something. But you never took a stroll in the forest because it made you feel good. You were afraid of the forest. So these were men, hunters and coal burners, who were out by themselves for long periods of times. And some people have explained this as things happen. They even in a big forest, a dense forest, you see things, you hear things, and they are longing maybe for a female company or something. That's what people have been explaining. And that's why it's become so sexualized. You also have the sexualized thing about some of the uh, beings out at sea, but it's also men who's sailing ships. Women weren't allowed on ships. They were considered bad luck and things like that back in the days. There's one female figure in Scandinavian and Swedish folklore, which is quite powerful in one way and not connected to sexuality. That was like a mine spirit. If you were working in mines, there was usually a certain kind of spirit called gruvrå, she was a ruler of the mine, and she was always properly dressed, and she warned people. You were not allowed to like whistle, you couldn't run, you couldn't swear. You had to respect the mine because that was her property in a way. So what she was doing was to make people behave in a good way, because of course a mine was a very dangerous work, and in a mine you were also a big group of people, big group of men. And I think why she's not sexualized is probably because people didn't have time to think about that in the mine. It's like, and they're also working in teams. So, but yeah, it's true. There's many female supernatural beings in Swedish folklore, and many of them are sexualized, just like the neck is sexualized for women.
That's I think it's interesting information about that because I was very curious to know if these have some influence by these aspects to say, oh, if you go to with this woman, your life will be in a tragedy or you'll be in a trouble. And that was one of the things that I was questioning myself, if this is have this type of influence. And
Mm.
you have you say that's a great information about that, because this is very common to people that say, oh, this type of perception of the woman in folklore, like a creature is related to the thing, related to some aspects. And this is, I think it's information that this is, I don't have any doubt about of much more about this situation, because I think you have this some aspects of the duality of the history about this
Yeah,
creature.
and like for example, the forest spirit, which is the most sexualized one. It's like it's men who are telling these stories when she is sexualized, and they're having intercourse with her. She's trying to lure them with sex and things like that. And these are men that can stay by themselves for weeks, several weeks at a time, and you can see the some women are also saying that they have met like the forest spirit and things like that, but it's never sexualized. It's always like you need to find a way to break the spells so that their husband can come back to her or something. And in these stories, you also have the in the stories by men, you also have her sexuality is also she as a very active sexual woman. She approaches the man, she's trying to seduce him and things like that. And that is the opposite of how a woman back in the 1800s at least should behave according to the rules back then. For us today, this might sound very strange indeed, but back in the days, a woman shouldn't be the active part in this. Even if you're married, like she should be submissive and things like that. And this forest spirit is everything but submissive.
No, that's a very interesting point to know about that. And we can some aspects of this type of folklore that I can saw, and many people saw, that are very changed to the past and from nowadays, from these aspects of the for Scandinavian folklore. We saw that a presence in the 18th century example. We saw that many aspects of the Romanticism changed some aspects of the scriptures that was described in a very, very uh, early past. And what you can say these changes impact in this descriptions of these figures? The paintings show a new perspective of this creature. How this is good or bad for we analyze this type of how can I say, of this subject, because we can saw that it's totally different from the descriptions, and for the when you can painting something that was not exactly like it was described. This is changed the mind of in our perception from the creatures of Scandinavian folklore.
I think like the biggest thing here is like the national romantics who wrote poems about these beings, painted them, things, wrote stories about them. They were actually living in an urban environment. They were educated, usually men, not always. There were also some women doing this, but they were they had like this difference here from the urban educated parts of the population, which was a minority, and the biggest part living in the rural countryside, where this was still a active living belief. So, and how it affected people, it's more like how we in modern times are when we try to, especially people that are becoming interested in Scandinavian folklore. They are probably looking at a popular book and can see maybe illustrations, paintings, and they see this like the forest spirit, like she's always naked, the neck is always naked, and that probably affects them in a way that they tend to think of these creatures as that they have always been naked, because they usually don't go back to like the archives, look at what people just a few generations ago, what they actually believed, what they told about them. The same thing goes with like for something else like trolls. uh, Trolls, if you go to the folklore, especially in Sweden, trolls were usually living like social groups very close to human beings, in that they had children, they married, they drank beer and they baked bread, and they were like smiths and everything. And they looked very much like human beings, probably a little bit more beautiful in some aspects. They could have like a tail or something that showed that they were a troll. But when you came to the artists, you have like in Norway, Theodor Kittelsen, who made his kind of trolls. You also have in Sweden, John Bauer, for example, who made his kind of trolls. And they look very much different from the folklore trolls. And nowadays, most people tend to think that trolls have always been like these ugly things in a way. I love the depictions of trolls, but they are still considered like ugly compared to what people believed back then. So they're not like looking like human beings really. So, and I think that's because like the Norwegian trolls, like Theodor Kittelsen or Erik Werenskjöld, they based their depictions on folk tales, fairy tales, which have different kind of types of trolls than folklore. And John Bauer did actually the same in Sweden. So how people tend to think about trolls are based on the artists' depictions in the late 1800s, not on folklore.
Yeah. Just to correct me, I say 18 is the 1900s that there was compared to the Romanticism. Sorry for say the century wrong. The 19th century, it's I think it is one of the most beautiful products, as you say. We have the 19 and the 20 beginning of the 20th century. We have this production of guys like Bowie, Asbjorn and Moe, that was doing a lot of compilations um, and some paintings about this period. And I can say the impact of these productions in some perspectives for the medias that are doing in nowadays. We have some movies, have video games that example we have the game Bramble, that was I don't know if you saw this game. Have a lot of these perception of the Hall of the Mountain King, that was one of the most counts of these tales of this folklore. And I can say that the impact of these authors and painters have in these perspectives from nowadays. Did you see that we say that they mold some aspects that people say or see from these figures?
I think it's a quite huge impact, especially like you mentioned Norway here, and for Norway it was also like you had Norway needed to find their own like Norwegian identity after they got rid of us terrible Swedes and the terrible Danes, because they were becoming their own nation after that. And one thing that what important was to do like the brothers Grimm did in what would become Germany, to collect different stories, to have like this folk, the idea of what it is to be like German, even though the brothers Grimm is not really German in that sense, but that's another story. But in Norway they did a similar thing, collecting folk tales, folk legends, and they had these big artists. They would become big in a way, like Kittelsen and Werenskjöld and so on. And their depictions, their idea of trolls and other supernatural beings became like the mold for later artists. And the same thing in Sweden with John Bauer, and even for Tomte, you have Jenny Nyström, who made like a Christmas cards and things like that. She painted thousands of tomtar, and people tend to think of tomtar as looking as her more nicely looking tomtar. They are always happy, small, jolly men. And they're also in groups. So I think the impact from the artists and some of the like authors and things from the late 1800s, the early 1900s, are still very influential. And Bramble, yeah, you just asked about Bramble. I think Bramble, same thing like the movies, the Troll Hunter from Norway. Bramble is a Swedish video game, but I think both of them are, in a way, they rely on these painters' depictions of supernatural beings from the late 1800s. And Bramble is also like kind of horror themed in a way. So you have super dangerous looking neck, and I haven't played it, but I've seen some trailers of it. He also had a big success in Sweden with this game called Year Walk. It's on 2014 or something, I think. It was made for cell phones, and then I think it's on Nintendo, PC, and everything. But it was also it's actually based on a divination ritual, but the creators didn't know much about folklore. They just read one page in one book, and they just have this artistic creativity, and they just combined all kinds of things, even with Old Norse stuff. They have some rune stones, all kinds of things going in this game. And I think that's how people nowadays, they kind of mix and mash and create their own things. So that's why sometimes you need scholars who are actually trying to understand and explain how things used to be back in the days, not this kind of romantic notion always.
Oh, that's very interesting. I think have another. I don't know if it is Into the Woods or In the Woods too, that have this perspective of Scandinavian folklore and Norse mythology too. And it's interesting because we saw that many concepts of nowadays have these inspirations for scenes from paintings and from descriptions of this in some books of these folklorists of the past that are present in the days. And this is interesting because Scandinavian folklore have a big revival with these medias, and persons will research about the books about this. I remember that my first contact with Scandinavian folklore is with Bauer. I think many persons know Bauer first and research much more artists from that. How the name is the artist that work with Christmas? I think is, let me remember, Carl Larsson have this impact with in some aspects of doing much more day by day paintings of the quotidian of the family, but he has these traditions of Christmas, of New Year, and many traditions of the Scandinavians.
But many of these like artists, they started out like Carl Larsson is a good example. August Malmström is another one. They used to do illustrations. This is in 1800s, and they did like illustration for different Christmas magazines. And many of the Christmas magazines included like some folk legends or fairy tales, because it was aimed for children and for reading to children at Christmas time. And then they also did some illustrations of different supernatural beings and things like that. And then they moved on to do these bigger kinds of paintings, and it had the their idea of how these creatures looks, but yeah, many of them are quite different from how they are how they are described in folklore. And this is also a thing. I think many of us today, we tend to think of, we want people things to be categorized very easily, so we can like look like to use another comparison with Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing game. So we want to have like a monster manual. We want to have this book with, oh, this is like the tomte, and it looks like this, and it has this kind of traits, and description is like this. But in folklore, it's everywhere. There are different descriptions. It looks differently, behaves differently, depending on who's telling this story. And in the modern days, I think in contemporary times, I think the most influential now living artist from Sweden is Johan Egerkrans, who's done this Nordiska Väsen, or it's like also a role-playing game called Väsen. And I think this also been translated to different languages. He's an artist. He's not a scholar, but he's made these beautiful illustrations based on Nordic folklore, and he sold a bunch of books. And I think most people, especially in Scandinavia, knows his illustrations now. And if you look like at Wikipedia, I would imagine Wikipedia also uses like his paintings for different kind of supernatural beings. And he's also directly inspired by like John Bauer and Kittus and
yeah, this is, I think it is a very beautiful part, in my opinion, from analyze the folklore is from this paint. I know that it's not exactly like the old descriptions, but we can say that these have a big impact visually in person's life to know or research about this folklore. And my next question is just about that, is the traditions of Christmas are big impacted for the Scandinavian folklore, we can say, and not only for the perspective of this how can I say, it's an English author about the Christmas, is what's the name? Oh my god, let me remember. Is I don't remember now. It's an author of that he doing related about Christmas.
an author.
Yes, he's English. Is Charles
English.
Dickens.
Charles Dickens. Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
The name is completely forgot in my mind.
Yeah, Christmas Carol. Yeah.
Yeah. Dickens have this impact in Christmas, but in Scandinavian folklore have an impact too. We have some creatures that like Grilla, like Nisis, like, and some aspects of this on how we can say that have these traditions connected to Christmas from the perspective of Scandinavian folklore, how these in the Christmas are very in nowadays the Scandinavians are so that this is perception of folklore in the Christmas time, how is celebrate this in some parts of Scandinavia, this connection of folklore and the time of Christmas.
Oh, it's also such a big question. We could probably talk for hours about the Christmas traditions. But if you concentrate like on supernatural beings, you mentioned Grilla from Iceland, which is a troll woman. She's not positive in that way, and it used to have another being before Santa Claus came to Sweden, called the Julebock, or the Jule goat would be. Very similar to Krampus. People probably know about Krampus from Austria and around the Alps. So before we had Santa Claus, and Santa Claus became something in the 1900s, in the mid 1900s. Before that, especially in the early 1900s, late 1800s, the one who were giving presents was a person dressed up as a goat. Very terrifying in some ways. This one is known at least from the late 1600s, 1700s in Denmark, Sweden, Norway. And it was usually also this, like Christmas is a dark period in Scandinavia or the Nordic countries. It's a long nights, very long nights, cold, very short days. We also have the winter solstice close to this, and the nights are very, very long. And connected with that in folklore is also the belief that on Christmas the dead returns to the living. That's the only connection I can see with Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. But we also had these ideas that the dead were returning to the living. So some of the things you ate at Christmas should be left for the dead for when they came. And there was also this belief, which you can find all around the Nordic countries actually, called the Christmas Mass of the Dead. This was actually the dead people. They came to the church and they celebrated Mass before on Christmas Day, early on Christmas Day, before human beings went there. So there are so many legends all around the Nordic countries when someone woke up a bit too early and saw a light in the church and hurried to the church because he or she thought that they were too late, and sat in the church in the bench, and after a while looking around and started to recognize people, but not living people. These were people who have died a long time ago or recently. And in some descriptions, even the priest is like a skeleton giving the service in the church. So that person has to run away, and to go away without hurt, they have to release some clothes so the dead can claw the clothes to bits and pieces. So what I mean with this is old folklore connected to this time of year is usually filled with dangerous things lurking around the corners of your house in the darkness in the night, which is the opposite from what we find today with this jolly Christmas feeling with Santa Claus coming with he says it's not traveling by reindeer in Sweden though. He usually goes by foot or in a carriage drawn by horses. So, which is quite interesting by itself. And also you have these ideas that this is a long story also. I've been recently guest curator for 2 museums about Tomte, one in America, one in Minnesota, which is telling the story of how Sweden got Santa Claus, and it's many different links that have to be combined and so on. And also one of the links for Sweden, we called the Santa Claus in Swedish is jultomte. And jul is an Old Norse word, has nothing to do with Christianity. It's like a period of the year, more like a month during this time of year. So it's jul, and you also have tomte, which it comes from the supernatural being, the Nisse Tomte. So you have those words combined. That's a Swedish word for jultomte, for Santa Claus. You don't have that in Norway or Denmark, so that's typical Swedish. So it's a bit of everything, and he's clearly a supernatural being, but he's a supernatural being created by grown-ups for children.
Oh, that's a very interesting thing to know. That I was very curious about that, because I think Christmas was very marked by this part of folklore. We have nieces, we have sometimes we can talk about Grina. I think I remember I have a Netflix animated series called Hilda. I don't know if you know about this series. It's very interesting because have so many traditions and have a part that we saw that this Christmas and the Scandinavian folklore interacting with that, and this is a very, very interesting to analyze. And one interesting questions to make is how much the Scandinavians are believe in these figures of folklore nowadays. How we can
Oh.
say that have persons that still believe in some elves and some of dwarves, some aspects of this, like figures of changelings that was have another series in Netflix that they call it Katla, that bring us this perception of the changelings,
Yeah,
perceptions of.
I recently wrote an article on changelings, actually, based on court cases. Some people have been accused of behaving badly because they thought that their child was a changeling. But that's another story. How many today believe in the supernatural beings? I think Swedes would say, most people would say that they don't believe in it. That's on the surface. But I've been all around because I'm giving folklore lectures all around the country, and I met all kinds of people. And it's the notion of belief is very hard to pin down. What do they be? Can you believe in something like ghosts or hauntings? It's like most people probably say, no, I don't believe in ghosts. But at certain occasions, they might find uncanny things, they might experience things, and then they're not so sure anymore. And I would say the same thing like in Iceland for their elves. Most people would be like in between, not like true believers, not like anti it. They would be in between. It depends on the context. And today I met a lot of people. I wouldn't say this is probably still a minority, but I tend to attract a crowd of people interested in folklore. But anyway, many people have said that they have experienced and say that they have seen like Tomte, the farmstead spirits. I even met one who said that she's seen a troll. So some they are not that's not common, but some people, especially in the countryside, in nature, people still experience strange things in nature, and I think it also has to do with the disenchantment, or especially enchantment of the world. We want it to be enchanted. We want it to be special, especially nowadays when everything is so mechanized and boring in a way. So Swedes are very secular, and most people don't even go to church. So we need to fill that void with something, and like with magic, some enchantment, and folklore is something that some people turn to. And I would say that we also have ideas when people, you had that in Brazil as well, I would guess, with this 2016, when everyone was talking about clowns terrifying children, and were attacking them everywhere. We have this news. And Swedes were like, no, before that, no, we don't believe in that. And I used to go around giving a lecture, and I've written about it, about a werewolf panic in 1972. That was something similar. It was like a school in southern tip of Sweden, in Trelleborg, where children were talking about a werewolf after a summer break. And after a while, the parents became not scared, but they were like, maybe there's a madman dressed as a werewolf somewhere. So they called the police, and police couldn't find anything. And the children were becoming more and more afraid of this werewolf. And after a while, they had to close down the school. It's called Pildammsskolan in southern Sweden. And then the news wanted to report this. So they wrote a lot about it, but they did it with like tongue-in-cheek kind of way, even though the children's scare was real. And the parents' scare were real, because they believed that the children were afraid of something, and maybe it's a madman or not. And this just happened a few weeks in 1972, and a new case in Stockholm a few months later. And people they did like, people back in the days, even in 1970s, were dumb, but they were believing all kinds of things. And then you have this with clowns in 2016. And I went through all kinds of media reportings of clowns, and you couldn't see the tongue-in-cheek report. Everyone was believing that there were actually clowns everywhere, and no one seemed to realize that everything most anyway, came from children themselves. They were saying like, it's when it becomes dark, they will be attacked by clowns. But no children ever said that they saw a clown go and sit in a bush and wait until it was dark. So the stories were clearly supernatural. So this happened quite recently, 2016. And did the police find any clowns? No, they didn't. The jails weren't filled with dangerous clowns. So this is a typical thing that things pops up even in our time and day, and we think we are rational, but it seems like we have this craze, and everyone is believing in things that are, for a folklore, is clearly like rumors or supernatural stories.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you told, because it I think it have some, I don't know how to explain that, but I think have some point that people want to provoke some effect in society, or doing something to appear more. We live the social media's days, and we have these persons that create this domino effect, that we can say that people trying to recreate some things that persons have are scared, or something that
Yeah,
part of a folklore, and try to create this aspect of fear. And this is interesting that you say. We have the clouds in 2016, we have the werewolves, we have some many of these aspects.
and that's a really good point, because I didn't say, but it's the biggest difference between 2016's clowns and 1972 werewolves was that you had the internet in 2016.
Yes.
So you could also look at like YouTube clips of people becoming attacked by clowns. And as what we say as a folklorist, we call that ostensive action, which is you hear legends, you hear stories, and then you want to perform it. So you dress up as clowns and you film a clip when someone is attacked by clowns. And if you look at it like with like source critical kind of way, you will see it's made up. But if you're like a 7-year-old child and everyone's talking about people becoming attacked by clowns, you will see it as a real thing. And that's the point. People tend to want to push this further and scare each other. And you also have all kinds of conspiracy theories and ideas mixed into this, like, oh, this was just something they did because they wanted to release it too, or you connected it to the Dark Knight, and shootings in America happened because someone was influenced by clowns and the Joker. But that shooting, which usually mentioned in the media back then, he was actually one of the shootings. He was inspired by Bane from the Dark Knight, not the Joker, which is something else. So, I mean, people tend to mix all kinds of things and are not very critical always in their thinking. So.
Yeah, I think it's a good point of view. Things like that.
There's also like if you look at how many people believe in the supernatural today, you also have New Age, which is very close to many folklore things, and you also have the idea about what happens when a person dies. Is there a part of that person that can still haunt this world, like ghost hauntings? And that is something that I think you find that in every culture around the world, some idea about ghosts. But that's very popular, and it's popular not only in Sweden, it's also popular everywhere. You can see all these kind of big shows that has to do with someone trying to go on like a legend trip to a place that's supposed to be haunted, and they go there with a small video camera, and everyone is scaring each other and running around screaming, and people are looking at that, and many people are telling their own stories about how they met different kind or experienced different notions of the dead. And they also have this like equipment they think is scientifical, which is measuring if there's ghosts or not ghosts, or things like that. So yeah, I think the supernatural is still very much around us, and we also have a lot of supernatural things happening by the internet, like creepy pastas and things. People tend to talk about the deep web, in a way, because people don't understand the deep web, so they think that there might be some entities there, that you write something and you get some messages back, and it's actually some kind of entity or spirit that's that's talking with you. So everything moves with our development. It's like, if you go back to the Viking Age and the Middle Ages, or like even 1800s, all kinds of stories about supernatural things are based in real day life. So they have to make sense for the persons telling these stories, and they have to be like rational for the people telling them, for their worldviews. And we have the same thing today, but we have different kind of ideas. We have the technology, which is still very strange, and you can find all kinds of things in technology.
Yeah, it's a great point about that. And for our last question, we know that we have a lot of stories, and if this interview will be have many days with you thought about all the creatures of have in the Scandinavian folklore, because it's many creatures, and many stories. We have stories like the folks, the hiding people. We have stories like the protagonist Askeladden that have impact in many histories. And I would like to know your opinion and for suggestions for the audience of the channel on how and tales about of Scandinavian folklore, how histories that you can say that people start for know much more about this folklore, how histories did you recommend that are very great for start to comprehend this folklore. And one of a question that I forgot to asking you is, we can say that Scandinavian folklore is a type of a fable too, have some impacts like a fable, have some aspect that told us some lessons that we can apprentice uh, with these histories. We can learn things from these histories. It's the last question.
Okay. The first question was if there's any way of where they should turn to if someone is interested in Scandinavian folklore.
Yeah, have suggestions of histories from Scandinavian folklore for people know about more about these stories. Have some stories that you consider, oh, this is interesting. It's interesting to learn about this creature of the Scandinavian folklore. How do you consider?
Oh, there's so many of them. I was thinking more in the line of books. If there's some books I can recommend or something, and I will start with that anyway. If someone is interested in trolls, so there's a great book in English by John Lindow. You might know him from the Old Norse, as an Old Norse scholar as well. But he wrote this book called Trolls: A Natural History in 2014, and it's available, and it's easy to read even for non-scholars. So it's very accessible, and it's not that thick. It's in a lot of pictures also, but it's very densely packed in a way. So he gets most of the most important things in it. And there's also an older book called Scandinavian Folk Belief and Legend, which is edited by Raymond Kvideland and Henning Semstorff in 1988, who collects different kind of folk legends, explain them, and put them into context. And you have, like, if you want to be scholarly and have something a bit heavier, it's more Bengt af Klintberg, a Swedish scholar. Is a book called The Types of the Swedish Folk Legend from 2010. So those are good choices, I would say, for different parts of Scandinavian folklore. Sadly, there's not a good book, not to my knowledge, and not what I can think of at the moment, a good book that is just have this great overview of Scandinavian folklore and explain different things, and especially supernatural beings. There are many popular ones, but I can't think of one that is academically good in that way. Maybe I forget something. But if there's a story or some legend that we can learn from, I think what we can learn from folk legends in general is that what do they say about their time and age, about the people? What do they mean for people? Uh, it's easy for us today to maybe like laugh at stories that might sound silly or dumb from the 1800s in farm life, but they mean something and they have a purpose, they have a function, and that's probably what we should think about. If there's a story, even if it's a story about humans and trolls, or what can they say to us from cultural historical kind of perspective? What do they mean? What do they mean more than just it's not fantasy stories, it's something, they mean something and they have a purpose. They maybe have explained borders in life or how to behave different kind of settings and things like that. So I think that would be probably a good thing to think about.
Yeah, that's interesting. And for the other question is if the Scandinavian folklore have some type of similarity with fables. That we can say that have some lessons that we learn with
Yeah.
with these histories of this type of folklore.
Yeah, they're part of culture. So as I said in the beginning, some people have said that folklore is our cultural DNA, and the stories actually are a part of our cultural DNA in a way. And also, they are very much, folklore is something that you can easily, I would say, build bridges between different cultures, because people explain what they perceive in the surroundings in different ways, but in some ways they are also very similar. We may call things different things. We might call our phenomena around us different things, but at the core, it's where you can find similarities in folklore. The same kind of stories popping up everywhere. You mentioned
Okay.
Askeladdad. It's like the Cinderella. It is the female variant, which is more famous. You have it in the oldest versions from China, and you have it all over Europe, and you also have it in like Africa and North America. So you have different versions of Cinderella everywhere, and you can ask, what people can ask themselves is why? Because uh, there's something they need. We want to say something with this story. It's not something that can have traveled from person to person, because it pop up everywhere in different cultures. So it's something more important behind it.
Yeah, that's a great point that you discuss here. Mr. Kuusela, thank you so much for doing this interview
Thank you.
with us, with the channel. For me, it's a big important interview because it's the first time that I have this awareness about this folklore, Scandinavian folklore. It's the first interview about this topic, and for me, I was in a big expectation because I love Scandinavian folklore as Norse mythology too. And this is an amazing interview. I learned a lot. I think the channel will learn a lot. The audience will be very pleasure with that. It's I think it's one of the topics that are very most amazing to learn. It's a thing that was a very pleasure when you will learn, because we have a lot of histories, creatures, and our imagination is put in some level that we can imagine ourselves in some forest, in some travel, and this is very very amazing to
Yeah.
analyze. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you.
I will just stop the recording.
Okay. Do I need to do something from my end, or can I just?
I will just stop just a moment.